Okay, I want to introduce you to British broadcasting history. And again, we start with the UK before we move to look at Ireland and the United States, because UK broadcasting is such a dramatic influence on Irish broadcasting, because it is Britain and the BBC which essentially invents what we will refer to as public service broadcasting, so the predominant form of broadcasting in Europe for most of the 20th century, up until the 1980s, 1990s. And we also look at the BBC first because it, I suppose, constitutes such a stark contrast with the way that the United States organises its broadcasting from its inception, which is a much more commercialised system. But before I talk about broadcasting itself, I want to talk a little bit about the underlying technology, because I want, I suppose, to make the argument that broadcasting is a social invention. That is, it is not something that comes about as a result of the discovery of a new communications technology, but rather it is a reinvention of an existing technology, and that reinvention is encouraged by or is driven by changed external social circumstances. So broadcasting is a response, a technological response, you might argue, to those changed circumstances. But it's a technological response in the sense that it uses an already existing technology to respond to changes coming about in the 1910s, 1920s, basically the first half of the 20th century. It's important to acknowledge that the basic scientific competence required for the creation of radio communications, whether as a point-to-point technology, communication technology, or as a broadcasting technology, predates the actual invention of radio by decades. Back in the 1860s, the Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell had theorized the idea, I suppose, of electromagnetic waves, or he proposed electromagnetic wave theory. And so what he suggested, but only in theory, he couldn't prove it, but he suggested this was a kind of a logical thing, that the Earth is encircled by electromagnetic waves. So these are waves which are naturally occurring phenomenon, and which are surfing around the planet on an ongoing basis, and always have been. But for James Clerk Maxwell, it's just a theory. And it wouldn't be until the 1880s that a German physicist, Heinrich Hertz, would finally devise an apparatus which effectively demonstrated the validity of Maxwell's original theory. And between 1886 and 1889, Heinrich Hertz publishes papers and does basically public experiments demonstrating that Maxwell's theory is correct. And what he has is a very simple piece of technology. He basically builds a piece of apparatus that generates an electric spark, and then which uses electromagnetic waves to surf that spark, or to push that spark, I suppose. Rather, the spark surfs on the electromagnetic waves, the best way of putting it. And that spark then reappears at the other end of a room on basically a spark receiver. So what Heinrich Hertz has built is a piece of laboratory apparatus, and it's there simply to prove a kind of an abstract theory. And Hertz himself said, "Well, I've proved it. So what? There's nothing particularly significant about this." Which is remarkable because this is the technology that would, become one of the most prevalent technologies of the 20th century. First as a point-to-point radio communications technology, then as a broadcast, as the underlying technology for broadcasting, and then I guess it would be reinvented again as a person-to-person technology again, because your own telephone, despite the name telephone, actually has very little to do with the landline, the wired telephones of the 1880s and the 1890s. In fact, your mobile phone is a radio set to all intents and purposes. If you've got Wi-Fi in your home, well, that's basically surfing on radio waves. So Hertz's contribution, along, of course, with that, with James Clerk Maxwell, to the 20th and 21st century's communications technologies really can't be overstated.